नमस्कार दोस्तों, स्वागत है आपका आज के इस नए ऐतिहासिक विश्लेषण में। आज हम सबकॉन्टिनेंट के एक बिल्कुल फॉरगॉटन शील्ड द हिंदू शाही किंगडम की हिस्ट्री को अनकवर करने वाले हैं। Before Mahmud of Ghazni launched his famous sweeping invasions into India, there was this incredibly powerful kingdom standing right between the rugged terrains of Central Asia and the fertile Indian subcontinent. For nearly 2 centuries, its rulers stood like an absolute wall, defending the northwestern frontier against repeated, relentless attacks. Yet, today, despite their massive historical significance, their names have almost completely faded from our collective memory. They are rarely mentioned in our textbooks with the detail they actually deserve. तो आज हम उन्हीं की कहानी, उनके struggles और उनकी legacy को गहराई से समझेंगे।
But hey, before we really get into it, it's absolutely crucial to lay down a bit of context. The modern nation-state boundaries of India, Pakistan, or Afghanistan, they simply did not exist back in this 9th century era. People weren't stopping at borders to show passports. Instead, armies, traders, monks, and ideas flowed freely across these terrains. These regions were fluidly connected through extensive trade routes, ancient pilgrimage paths, and constantly shifting political alliances. So, as we dive deep into this analysis today, I really want you to keep that historical lens on. Try to look at the geography as one massive, continuous, and breathing landscape, rather than a map divided by the strict modern lines we know today.
So, setting that stage, we really have to ask ourselves, आखिर ये kings थे कौन? Why were they so absolutely critical to the geopolitical stability of the entire region? And perhaps most importantly, how did their eventual fall shatter that stability and change the history of Punjab and honestly the whole subcontinent forever? These are the massive historical mysteries we're going to unpack today. Just take a second to think about what it actually takes to hold a frontier for 200 years against some of the greatest military machines of the medieval world. It's pretty mind-blowing.
All right, let's dive right in. Here is the roadmap we'll use to trace the geopolitical and military history of this fascinating era. We'll start with the forgotten Hindu Shahis themselves, move on to the gateway to the subcontinent, check out their life, wealth, and capitals, and then look at the warrior kings. After that, we'll break down the epic clash of elephants versus mounted archers, and finally, wrap up with the legacy of the shield.
So, kicking things off with part 1, the forgotten Hindu Shahis. We really need to establish exactly what and where this kingdom was around the 9th century CE. They didn't just appear out of thin air, right? They rose to power after the gradual decline of the earlier Kabul Shahis, confidently stepping up to take direct control of one of the most volatile, unpredictable, and economically vital regions in the entire medieval world.
The sheer geographical spread of their territories is absolutely staggering when you think about the logistics of ruling it back then. We're talking about a footprint stretching from the harsh mountains of eastern Afghanistan all the way across the rich Peshawar Valley, over the rugged Potahar Plateau and the highly defensible Salt Range, right down to the bustling city of Lahore, and even extending into parts of present-day Jammu. This massive footprint was no accident. It placed the Hindu Shahis directly in the path of literally any army, merchant caravan, or nomadic tribe marching from Central Asia toward the fertile plains of northern India. They were sitting right on the geopolitical highway of the era. Great for wealth, sure, but it made them a constant, massive target.
Which brings us perfectly to our second section, the gateway to the subcontinent. We need to really understand why this specific piece of geography, especially the greater Punjab region, was so fiercely contested by empires for centuries. It wasn't just because the land was fertile and flanked by 5 life-giving rivers. It was fundamentally about controlling the movement of humans, goods, and, of course, armies.
The answer to that geographic contest lies entirely with the Khyber Pass. Imagine a narrow, unforgiving cut through towering, hostile mountains. This was the highly strategic artery connecting the vast steppes of Central Asia directly to the rich subcontinent. If you were an emperor who wanted to move massive caravans of luxury trade, send diplomatic convoys, or, march an army of 50,000 men, this was your primary, inevitable route. So the crucial point here is that whoever controlled the Khyber Pass held the keys to the entire gateway to India. And the Hindu Shahis, they acted as the absolute uncompromising shield for this specific, dangerous choke point. Essentially, they were the heavily armed bouncers at the door of the subcontinent.
But how on earth did they sustain this incredible defense for so long? Let's get into part 3, life, wealth, and capitals. Because let's face it, you simply cannot fund a 2-century-long, high-stakes military defense on a volatile frontier without an incredibly strong, dynamic economy backing you up at home.
We can actually trace their political priorities through their shifting capitals, which is a brilliantly organized system proving how dynamically they adapted to survive. First, we have Bandapura, also known as Hund. Now, this was situated right on the banks of the mighty Indus River. It served as an early capital in a bustling trading town, gathering massive wealth from river caravans. But then, as the military threat from the Ghaznavids in the west grew more and more terrifying, they realized they couldn't just stay in an exposed river town. So they made a brilliant strategic pivot to Nandana Fort in the Salt Range. This was a highly defensible, rugged, military stronghold that bought them precious time. And finally, they anchored themselves in Lahore in the Punjab plains, connecting the dangerous, warring frontier with the fertile, safe heartland. Lahore acted as a vibrant early cultural hub and supply base. They were literally moving their command center to keep the kingdom alive.
And beyond just impregnable fortresses, their society was deeply economically prosperous. It was filled with a rich blend of languages and a highly organized civic structure. Look at the massive diversity in their agriculture. They weren't just barely surviving, they were actively cultivating rich cash crops like wheat, barley, cotton, and sugarcane. Their merchants were the lifeblood of the economy, acting as highly connected individuals, bridging the markets of Kashmir, Central Asia, Sindh, and the Gangetic Plains. And their civic centers were fascinating too. Temples weren't just places for spiritual worship, they functioned as crucial everyday hubs for education, massive charity distributions, and local administration. Linguistically, it was this beautifully layered society. Sanskrit was utilized for the scholars and royal courts, while the common people transacted and told their stories in early forms of Punjabi. So it was a thriving, deeply sophisticated civilization that obviously had a whole lot to lose.
All of this incredible wealth and culture brings us to the very heart of our analysis in Part 4, the warrior kings. Maintaining all of that prosperity required leaders who were quite literally willing to bleed for it. This wasn't a sudden collapse where a kingdom was surprised in the night. No, this was a grueling, desperately fought saga of resistance. The historical timeline here brilliantly illustrates that this wasn't just a single tragic defeat. Ye ek lamba sangharsh tha, a continuous, active, burning resistance spanning several generations of determined rulers. Take the late 10th century, for example. King Jayapala realized a really dangerous new force was emerging in Afghanistan under Sabuktigin. He didn't just cower behind his walls, he boldly launched preemptive campaigns to strike first. Though he was eventually defeated by Mahmud in 1001 CE, after which he famously abdicated out of immense personal dishonor, the fighting spirit of his lineage absolutely did not break. His successor, Anandapala, stepped right up to the plate. He used brilliant diplomacy to form a massive regional coalition of neighboring kings to fight back together around 1008 CE. And even after that great coalition was tragically broken, rulers like Trilochanapala and Bhimapala just kept fighting. They retreated from fort to fort well into the mid-11th century, fighting tooth and nail for every single inch of land. So how exactly did they fight, and why did they ultimately lose? Let's impartially analyze the ultimate clash in Part 5, Elephants versus Mounted Archers. We need to look at what was actually happening on those blood-soaked battlefields that fundamentally shifted the balance of power in the medieval world.
There is a stark, fatal contrast between these two military doctrines. This matchup was basically a clash of completely incompatible tactics. The Hindu Shahi military doctrine was heavily defensive, honorable, and static. They relied on impenetrable hill forts, deeply loyal heavy infantry, and of course, the sheer terror and crushing weight of massive war elephants. On the flip side, the Ghaznavid military doctrine was entirely about speed, harassment, and striking power. They relied on fast cavalry, highly skilled mounted archers who could shoot accurately while retreating, and unparalleled battlefield mobility. Just imagine the sheer terror of standing in a slow-moving heavy infantry formation, being rained upon by arrows from enemies you literally can't even catch. The heavy static defenses of the Shahis simply could not outmaneuver the fast, highly mobile mounted archers of the Ghaznavids in an open battle. It's a classic, devastating historical collision between immense static strength and lethal maneuverability.
And that brings us to the final chapter of our discussion, the legacy of the shield. How does a 200-year-old defense finally crack? What is the actual breaking point of an empire? Ultimately, it was a textbook, tragic case of military attrition. Unki takata dire dire sal darsal kam hoti gai, as they lost their wealth and critical frontier choke points. It started with the repeated, relentless invasions. Mahmud of Ghazni didn't just come once, he came year after year, giving the Shahis absolutely zero time to recover their economy or rebuild their armies. Then you factor in the decisive battlefield effectiveness of those mounted archers constantly outplaying the Shahi elephants. This directly led to a painful, gradual loss of highly strategic frontier territories, slowly pushing the kingdom further and further east, away from their main sources of wealth. And ultimately, the final blow was simply the total erosion of their economic and military resources after successive, endless wars. They didn't surrender out of cowardice, they fought until there was quite literally nothing left to fight with.
Now, it's really vital to note that everything we've covered in this explainer is anchored securely in a strict evidence framework. We draw upon rich archaeology, like surviving ruins of their hill forts in the Salt Range, their temple architecture, minted coins, and stone inscriptions. Then, we cross-reference these silent stones with contemporary sources, diligently comparing the accounts in Persian chronicles with near-contemporary Indian records, alongside decades of modern historical research. This rigorous methodology is exactly how we maintain a completely objective analysis. It helps us carefully separate modern folklore and myths from verifiable, hard historical data, keeping our understanding of the past factual, precise, and respectful to the truth.
The story of Mahmud of Ghazni does not begin in Ghazni. It begins with the kings who stood in his path. The Hindu Shahis remind us that this critical frontier was fiercely contested, generation after generation, and certainly not simply conquered overnight. Unki kahani ek incredible resistance or resilience ki kahani hai. It really makes you wonder, though, if the Hindu Shahis had managed to adapt their military tactics and successfully held the Khyber Pass just a few decades longer, how entirely different would the geopolitical map of the subcontinent look today? अगर आपको हमारा ये ऐतिहासिक विश्लेषण पसंद आया है और आपको इस डीप डाइव से कुछ नया सीखने को मिला है, तो इस एक्सप्लेनर को लाइक और शेयर ज़रूर करें। और हाँ, हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करना मत भूलना ताकि हम ऐसी ही fascinating histories आप तक लाते रहें। मिलते हैं अगले चैप्टर में, where we will continue to explore the incredible depths of our shared past.